Member for Alva.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to comment briefly on this resolution. And I rise not in a very happy mode. I don't believe that we are in a good place. And I rise with unbridled concern for my crisis-laden homeland. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is requesting the approval of the House to permit the Minister to borrow $10.7 million from the Caribbean Development Bank Special Fund Resources, SFR, which is the concessionary window of the bank for the purpose of meeting the ordinary capital resources. Debt obligation of St. Lucia to the Caribbean Development Bank for a period commencing October 1st, 2020 and terminating on September 30th, 2021. Mr. Speaker, this loan, according to the resolution, is supposed to preserve fiscal space and to be used to finance immediate essential emergency COVID-19 pandemic-related health expenditure and to bolster economic and social recovery. In other words, Mr. Speaker, CDB is giving us a concessionary loan to pay for our debt obligations that we owe them for a period of 1 year from October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. The direct analogy of this would be that you are taking a loan to pay off your debt obligations for another loan, as clearly articulated by the leader of the opposition, member for Castries East. The idea is that if we give the economy some breathing space to recover and allow the government to finance critical health-related expenditure and to promote economic and social recovery. This sounds a bit like the rapid credit facility of the IMF loan, where the money was supposed to have been utilized for critical health expenditure, income support, and cash transfers. The only difference in this case is that the government will not be getting any money. But to use the money, it would have paid to CDB for debt obligations, for the health expenditures, and bolster economic and social recovery. We cannot trust this government to do this, Mr. Speaker, knowing that they use the IMF, RCF resources for capital projects. The resolution clearly says to preserve the fiscal space. And I would like to ask, what fiscal space, Mr. Speaker? It is important for the Minister of Finance to present a report on the state of finances of the country in order to determine whether we have any more fiscal space or whether the government has completely eroded the fiscal space that was available, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, I would like to ask whether the Minister of Finance has drawn up an expenditure plan to show how these funds, which were to be used to pay the debt obligations, will be used in meeting the purposes of this loan. Mr. Speaker, my biggest concern is the status of our debt and our capacity to meet our debt service obligations. If GDP falls by 18% in 2020, as indicated by the Minister for Finance, which is the Cdb'S latest projection, this would mean that our GDP at current market prices would drop significantly from EC $5.73 billion in 2019 to EC $4.699 billion. Our debt stock would grow by the extent of the net financing requirements of this year's budget, as indicated by the estimates of expenditure for 2020-2021, and on page 71 of the Prime Minister's budget presentation. It would move the debt stock from $3.42 billion in 2019 to $3.98 billion. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia's debt to GDP ratio will increase significantly from 59.6% in 2019 to 84.7% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, this is a staggering increase of 25.1%, placing St. Lucia on an unsustainable debt path and into the door of the IMF. These numbers are based on the 2019 Economic and Social Review and the estimates as indicated, as well as the Prime Minister's own budget presentation, Mr. Speaker. It is to be noted that there have been 2 rebasing exercises in 2016 and 2019, respectively, for gross domestic product, resulting in a substantial increase in our GDP. If we were to use the economic series before rebasing, that is in 2016, the series that our administration utilized worked in 2015, our debt to GDP ratio would be closer to 100%. This is a matter of great concern to all of us in this Honorable House, and it shows the extent of the mismanagement by this government, and more particularly the weaknesses exposed by COVID-19 in this economic management of this country by this administration. And Mr. Speaker, I recall over the past 4 years, we on this side have been cautioning the Minister for Finance, indicating to him that the borrowing, like there's no tomorrow, would have placed us in difficulty when we were confronted with an emergency. A government has a choice of a number of policy responses it can implement in the face of a pandemic like COVID-19, which hasn't induced a contraction in the tourism sector and, of course, related industries. We know we are confronted with serious curtailment of public sector income, and therefore we had to preserve the fiscal space to respond to this emergency. Having borrowed for all useless projects and activities, we are confronted with a scenario now when we're supposed to be utilizing Cdb, the IMF and World Bank, to assist us in responding to the pandemic. We have to utilize those resources to pay loans. And whilst the member for Vieux North was on his feet, asking about the various questions, the fishermen and other persons in the community, the government specifically asked for the fiscal space to respond to health-related expenditure. In other words, give us the loan to pay that obligation, leaving our hands free to respond to those situations in the country. But obviously, based on its maneuverings over the years, it has tied up itself and cannot respond effectively to the situation. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy choices, put simply, are whether a government should help support consumption by way of income support and cash transfers to those affected, or to increase investment to attempt to restart the economy. Or you can have a combination of the 2 policy approaches, Mr. Speaker. Namely, policies that both promote consumption to households and support business to ensure survival and capital projects, to aid in the recovery and stimulate growth. In other words, Mr. Speaker, in the immediate period of COVID-19, our fiscal response was supposed to assist those who have lost their jobs and others from falling into poverty, and for them to continue to survive so that there is consumption in the economy of the country. Mr. Speaker, the policy adopted by most countries, to substantiate my argument, includes support to households and businesses. So many businesses are closing down. So many businesses, Mr. Speaker, may disappear, where real St. Lucians are employed in. And those persons have made tremendous sacrifice to keep business flowing over the years. And during this COVID-19, the government was supposed to be in a position to provide a more conducive environment for them to survive. The government, for some unknown perverse reason, has adopted the approach of predominantly spending on investment through roads and other infrastructural projects, including construction of the airports. These projects are predominantly capital intensive and do not target the affected populations who have currently lost their jobs from the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. That's very simple to understand, and I think the member for Vieux North was talking about the opportunity cost of utilizing those monies to pay the loan. As a result, the level of poverty and pain inflicted on the population has increased substantially, as the social protection mechanisms instituted by the government have been weak, slow, and ineffective, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the policy of using the NIC resources to provide for relief for the members has implications for the long-term sustainability of the NIC and is not a desirable policy approach to take in such a situation. The government has not responded in an expeditious manner to provide the urgent support that people need at this time, allowing people to endure further pain and suffering. Government's response to this pandemic should have been much quicker, utilizing, as I indicated a few moments ago, the IMF, World Bank, Cdb, and other resources to help support households and businesses. Mr. Speaker, further, many small businesses are on the brink of closure, and some, like I indicated, have already closed down. The policy response by the government to small and medium enterprises has been weak and ineffective, offering a range of tax concessions to financial institutions who lend to them. What's the reality, Mr. Speaker? It is well known that bank lending to the private sector has contracted for 6 consecutive years, given that banks have adopted a risk-averse approach to lending to the private sector as a result of the high levels of non-performing loans from that sector and the increased risk of lending to that sector. Mr. Speaker, banks have in fact been investing much of the deposits in foreign assets. The policy of giving corporate tax credits to banks as a result of lending to small business will therefore not yield the desired effect, given that it does not alter the risk of lending to that sector. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition speaks on this issue in this Honorable House, it is further indicating to the Minister for Finance and the government that this is not a joke. The full effect of COVID-19 is yet to be felt. But they come and sit business as usual and believe that we are playing politics. We came here to conduct serious business. If they come to play, they can go to SNS and buy their toys and play. But we on this side did not come here to play. People's lives are being affected. Children cannot go to school in September because there are no resources to support them going to school. And we see absolutely no framework to create that improvement in their lives to ensure that those families can survive. And when we come here, Mr. Speaker, we accentuate the business of the people. We shall always do so. But even in COVID-19, the business of horses are more important to them than the business of the people. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am asking the government to recalibrate, to change the focus to the people of this country. Help our people navigate the COVID-19 turbulent period so that together we can recover from this thing a better and, of course, stronger society. Mr. Speaker, I promise to be brief, and so I yield the floor.